I'm Holly. I'm here with Councillor Aidan McLaren-Caux to talk about the Columbia River Treaty. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Holly. How are you?
I'm good. So what would you say are the pros and cons of being on village council?
Well, there's lots of pros to being on council. And I don't know if there's cons so much as just impacts on somebody's life. So pros would be you get to have an impact on the decisions that affect the community. You get to engage with parts of the community that you wouldn't otherwise be able to or normally wouldn't engage with. And if I have to pick a con, it would be that there is an impact on one's life, as in you've got to go to meetings and do a lot of reading, several 100-page agendas regularly, and so that's, I mean, I have kids and a family, so there's an impact on that, but it's not really a con, it's just part of the job, so
Right.
I'd say those are the main things.
All right, okay. Can you briefly explain the Columbia River Treaty for us?
I can do my best. It's a complex document, but basically the Columbia River Treaty is an agreement between Canada and the United States that governs the way the Columbia River is managed on both sides of the border. It essentially governs how we control the flow of water from Canada to the United States. There's a few dams on our side that are governed by the treaty, and there's one dam on the United States side. And the main purposes of the original treaty are to generate power and to have flood control, to save destruction and damage by flooding downstream.
Okay, thank you. Why did we agree to the current treaty, and how are we negotiating for the 2024 treaty?
Well, it was done in the 60s, so I can't speak for, I mean, I wasn't born yet, so I don't know exactly the rationale for why they did it, but I think the two main purposes, like I said, were it was power, to generate power, and for flood control.
Right.
And the treaty now, the treaty doesn't expire, so it doesn't actually end this year. There's certain parts of it that kind of go into a different phase this year because it's been 60 years. But it's currently being renegotiated. There is a chance that it will be done this year, or at least a kind of agreement in principle, so kind of a draft treaty will be ready to be reviewed. And the main differences between the treaty 60 years ago and the treaty now is that there's a much broader engagement from the people on both sides of the border, and there's a broader number of topics that are covered by the treaty. Because before it was, like I said, flood control and power generation. Mm-hmm. And this time they're taking into account things like First Nations, Indigenous, cultural values, socioeconomic interests, so things like, we lost our beach last year for half the summer, so that's, having that access, that recreation access is important to a lot of people. Fish and wildlife habitat, and riparian management, so that ecosystem function, so how we manage for all those things. And so there's much different talk at the table these days, and there's there's more people at the table, including First Nations on the Canadian side as observers that have Observer Plus status, which means they're at the table and are not quite negotiators, but they can have input to our negotiating team. And on the United States side, there are First Nations that are acting as they don't sit at the table, but they act as advisors to the United States team. So there's a lot of differences between 60 years ago and now.
Yeah. Okay, so because of the low lake water level, like you said, a lot of our summer activities were limited last year and are limited. So what do we get to substitute for those loss of activities?
It's not a straightforward as one for one. Like we don't, because we lost our beach or water access, we get something directly back. But there are ways that the people at least on the Canadian side, benefits are given to people on the Canadian side because of the impacts that we have to deal with, such as the water levels that go up and down. One of which is the Columbia Basin Trust, which has an endowment. So they were given a fair amount of money, in hundreds of millions of dollars, in the mid-90s, and they've managed that money since then, and are currently their values in the billions of dollars. So it's a very valuable organization, and they, as most people that live here know, they have all kinds of social benefit programs. So granting, like they give out grants for all kinds of things, community investment programs. So that in an indirect way is how we're kind of, I'm simplifying it, but that's how we get kind of paid back for the impacts that we have from the water fluctuating so much. And there are other smaller things like BC Hydro, for example, doesn't pay taxes on the dams that they have on the Columbia River. So instead of paying taxes, they make a payment in lieu of taxes to our regional government, which then we also use for grants. So the regional district, the Nakusp has what's called a community development grant, which council just last week, or this week even, gave out $20,000 or $25,000 to local nonprofits that were asking for it. So it's not a direct water's low, here's something in return, but there are benefits that go back to community. And there's other things like, the Columbia River, the dams on the Columbia River generate about 25% of the electricity for the province, which keeps our electricity costs relatively low. I think it's one of the lowest electricity costs in North America. And of course, flood control. This river used to flood pretty regularly before it was controlled by the dams, so we never have to worry about that unless there's some incredibly cataclysmic event. But,
right.
So those are benefits from the treaty.
Right. Okay. How do you think that this like the water going down and stuff, how do you think it'll affect future generations and stuff? Because I know last year it was kind of sucked. Yep. Having no beach for half of the summer. So how do you think it'll affect future generations?
I think it depends on how this treaty, the renegotiated treaty, how that happens. What it's all done behind closed doors, so we don't really know what's happening until they give us a kind of a preview. But there's something that we're hoping that they're negotiating called adaptive management, which means that that on the Canadian side, we have more flexibility in terms of where we put the water within the system, so that we can try to keep the levels of this reservoir in particular at a more consistent or manageable level. Mm-hmm. So it depends on how that plays out. But for me, I think one of my largest concerns is the impact of the changing climate and how that's going to affect how things go with the river, because we can make all the plans that we want, but if there's increasingly less snow in the mountains, if the snowpack keeps getting smaller and smaller, which it's trending to do, that means there's less water storage up high. So when spring melt, there's less water coming down. And we're in a drought right now, so we don't have as much rainfall as we normally do. So these reservoirs don't fill up the way we expect them to, or they don't fill up as much as we expect them to, or the water comes at the wrong time. I've looked at lots of models of climate change, looking into the future, different models of what might happen. And all of them say that we will probably actually get more rain or more precipitation, but it'll mostly be rain and at the wrong time. So we'll have lots of water coming through the system, but not when we want it. So like you said, in the summer, the challenge is, I'd love to take my kids to the beach and go play, and it's part of the reason we live here, but if the water comes in March and November, that doesn't help us for summer. But So it's really dependent, to answer your question, it's really dependent on what comes out of the negotiations right now and what happens with climate change, because that's, you know, if there's less water, then we all have a
Yeah.
problem for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, exactly. In a simple way, can you kind of explain how much water is going to the United States? Here?
Not really. There's no real simple answer. There are agreements within the treaty, and then there's what they call non-treaty storage agreements. So there's different hydrological engineering is one of the most complicated sciences there is, like fluid dynamics. So to try to understand the system in a really simplified way is probably not very easy. But essentially, I think to answer your question, because of the current treaty, and until we change it, we have to give them a certain amount of water. What that is in terms of how many thousands of gallons per minute or liters per minute, I don't have an answer because it fluctuates depending on what their requirements are. But we are obliged to give them a certain amount of water every year.
So, what is your role with the Nakusp and Area Development Board and the RDCK?
Okay, so two totally different things. The NADB, so the Nakusp Area Development Board, is a nonprofit based in Nakusp, and the purpose of it is kind of economic development. It's community. It's not. Anyway, I could go on, but to put it simply, it's just community-led economic development, and it's run by a board of volunteers. And they've hired me as their economic development coordinator. So that's my title, economic development coordinator. And we run projects like we have an agriculture project, Grow Our Lakes. We just developed a signage and wayfinding plan for the village. So hopefully we'll be putting up some new signage for the town. And another big thing we're working on right now is a housing project, workforce housing.
Right.
So lots of work on the go, lots of projects underway. So that's NADB, and RDCK is the regional district of Central Kootenay, and I'm a director on the board of the regional district, and I'm appointed from village council. So each municipal council in the regional district appoints one of their members as the municipal director. I was chosen from our council, and as a function of that, I go to board meetings every once a month, and even I just spent all morning in a recreation committee meeting, and lots of reading, and it's like council but on steroids. Like this, it's the same idea. It's local government as well, but it's a much bigger organization, with mostly a lot more reading and a lot more meetings.
Right.
And then, so I represent Nakusp, but I also have that kind of regional lens to make decisions for the whole district.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add or say before we finish?
Not really. I think this is great. I think that obviously my children are here and they're having a great time, and glad that we get to do this, and glad that we have the ability to for you guys to have this kind of experience. And so yeah, just happy to be here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. We appreciated it very much.
My pleasure.